They laughed at the woman in camouflage. They whispered that she was trying too hard. They treated her like an inconvenience, like a joke, until the ground began to tremble, until rotors cut through the sky, until a Black Hawk descended, not for a drill, not for a show, but for her. What they didn't know was that silence can carry rank, and dignity doesn't need to announce itself. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments, and if stories of quiet strength and hidden heroes matter to you, please subscribe. Now let's begin. The first insult came wrapped in laughter. It cut through the break room like a careless blade, sharp and unnecessary, spoken just loud enough to be heard but soft enough to deny. Someone smirked. Someone else didn't look up. Coffee steamed. Phones scrolled. And the woman in camouflage stood still, her fingers tightening around a chipped ceramic mug that read "World's Best Employee," a joke gift, long faded. She didn't respond. She never did. The fabric of her camo jacket was worn thin at the elbows, the pattern dulled by time and sun. It didn't fit the office. It didn't fit their polished shoes, their pressed blouses, their carefully curated small talk. To them, she looked like she was playing dress up in a place that demanded conformity. To her, it was just clothing, a habit, a reminder. Her name was Elena Cross, and she had learned long ago that reacting only fed the fire. When someone muttered, "It's Halloween early this year," she kept walking. When a supervisor joked about military cosplay, she nodded once and took notes. When coworkers rolled their eyes as she passed, she felt it every time, like grit under the skin. But she stayed silent, because silence had once kept people alive. Elena worked in logistics for a large infrastructure firm, a place of glass walls and fluorescent lighting, where urgency was measured in emails and deadlines instead of heartbeats. Her job was unremarkable on paper. Supply coordination, risk assessment, emergency planning. She was precise, efficient, always early, and deeply misunderstood. They didn't see the way her eyes mapped every exit when she entered a room. They didn't notice how she positioned her chair with her back to a wall. They didn't understand why sudden noises made her shoulders tense before she forced them still. To them, she was odd, aloof, too serious. To Elena, this place was just another environment to survive. Before the office, before the jokes, before the camo became a punchline, Elena Cross had worn that uniform in places where the air smelled like dust and metal, where the horizon shimmered with heat and threat. She had been a crew chief on a Black Hawk helicopter 15 years earlier, responsible for keeping the aircraft and the people inside it alive. Her hands had learned the language of machinery vibration, resistance, the subtle difference between a healthy engine and one about to fail. She trusted her instincts because she had buried friends who ignored theirs. She remembered her first deployment vividly. The way the rotors kicked up sand so thick it felt like breathing through cloth. The way her gloves were always coated in grease, no matter how often she wiped them. The way fear didn't arrive as panic, but as clarity, sharp, focused, relentless. She remembered Mason. He'd been the pilot who never raised his voice, even under fire. The one who brought extra coffee for the crew and pretended it was no big deal. The one who taught her that calm was contagious. He didn't make it home. Neither did Riley, who laughed too loud and sang off key. Neither did June, who carried photos of her kids in her vest. Elena carried them all now, in her posture, in her restraint, in the way she never wasted words. When her service ended, not by choice, but by injury, she came home with a commendation, a scar along her ribs, and a silence that felt safer than explanation. Civilians asked questions that had no answers. Thank yous that felt hollow. Pity she didn't want. So she stopped explaining. She took a job where competence mattered more than conversation. Or so she thought. The jokes escalated slowly, like pressure building in a sealed room. A comment about her boots during a meeting, a snide remark about her posture being too intense. An anonymous note left on her desk, "Relax. You're not in the army anymore." She read it once, folded it neatly, and threw it away. Around her, people watched, some uncomfortable, some amused, most indifferent. Silence spread not as strength, but as avoidance. It was easier not to intervene. Easier to let the odd one absorb the discomfort. Elena absorbed it all. Because she had learned that endurance wasn't loud. One afternoon, an emergency preparedness review was scheduled, her domain. A senior manager questioned her recommendations publicly, dismissing evacuation protocols as overkill. He laughed when she insisted on redundancy. "This isn't a war zone," he said, smiling for the room. Alina met his eyes. "No," she replied calmly. "But emergencies don't announce themselves." The room went quiet for half a second, then the meeting moved on. The manager rolled his eyes. Later, someone mimicked her tone behind her back. She heard it. She always heard it. What no one noticed was the encrypted message that arrived on Elena's phone that evening. A single line. "We're inbound tomorrow. Window tight." Same protocol. She stared at it for a long moment, thumb hovering, breath steady. She typed back "confirmed" and slipped the phone back into her pocket. The next day, she wore the same camo jacket. It was just after noon when the sky changed. At first, it was subtle, a distant vibration, more felt than heard. Windows rattled faintly. Conversations faltered. Someone frowned and looked up. Then the sound deepened. The air itself seemed to press downward. Heavy and unmistakable. People poured out of the building onto the open lot, shielding their eyes as a Black Hawk helicopter descended with controlled precision, rotors churning the air into chaos. Dust spiraled. Loose papers scattered like startled birds. Phones came out. Mouths fell open. Security froze. And in the middle of it all, Alina Cross stood perfectly still. She adjusted her jacket, set down her mug, and walked forward. The helicopter settled. The side door opened. A uniformed officer stepped out, posture rigid with respect. He scanned the crowd, then his gaze locked onto Alina. He straightened and saluted. The lot went silent. Not the awkward silence of meetings, but the kind that presses against the chest. Alina returned the salute, precise and unhurried. The officer spoke, his voice steady, carrying without force. "Crew Chief Cross, we're ready." People stared. The manager who had laughed at her took a step back, color draining from his face. Someone whispered her name like a question. Alina didn't look at them. She addressed the officer quietly. "Any issues?" "None we can't handle," he replied. "Wouldn't be here if we didn't need you." She nodded once. Then, as if remembering something, she turned. Her eyes swept the crowd, not accusing, not triumphant, just calm. "This is why we plan," she said evenly. "This is why we don't mock what we don't understand." Then she boarded the helicopter. The door closed. The rotors roared. And just like that, she was airborne, lifted away by the very machine they thought was a costume. The office didn't return to normal. It couldn't. The jokes stopped. The whispers turned into apologies, some spoken, some not. A memo circulated, praising Alina's expertise and announcing her temporary reassignment to a federal emergency response operation. The manager requested a transfer weeks later. In the break room, her mug sat untouched. Someone taped a note beneath it. "Thank you for your service. It wasn't perfect, but it was something." People would later repeat the words they heard that day. She never raised her voice and still outranked the room. Some uniforms don't come off when the war ends. And silence, one coworker said quietly, "Wasn't weakness, it's control." Alina returned months later, quieter than before. She wore civilian clothes now. But the way people looked at her had changed. They stood a little straighter, listened a little closer, and understood, finally, that heroism doesn't demand attention. Sometimes it just waits. There are people around us fighting battles we'll never see, carrying ranks we didn't earn the right to question, wearing silence like armor. Before you judge, pause. Before you mock, look closer. And if this story moved you, share it. Tell us where you're watching from. And subscribe for more stories that honor the quiet heroes among us. Because not every warrior announces their arrival. Sometimes, they just let the helicopter do it for them.